Hey everybody, Steve from Black Octopus Sound, and I'm going to show you my #1 mix technique using a Max for Live device in Ableton Live. And so this one's a total game changer, so pay attention, listen closely, and follow along to a T. So here goes. So this is a track that I'm working on, it's almost done, and I'm just kind of in the back 5 to 10% of the Mixdown. And in the build-up, there's a lead synth that kicks in that has quite a bit of mid-range energy to it. And also I have some mid-range basses that also have some texture and detail, and also indeed as well quite a bit of mid-range energy. And so as you know, when we throw too much of similar sounds that sit in the same part of the frequency spectrum, it can create a bit of a disaster. It's like the ear has a hard time digesting and metabolizing. It's kind of like the way that I like to look at a cluttered section of a mix is kind of like a person wearing a 100% yellow outfit standing up against a 100% yellow same color wall. Like the eye has to work really hard to differentiate. And there's this quality of like really exerting one's effort to be able to differentiate between the wall and the person. And so it's the same thing when we have a cluttered mix. We want to have everything have its own space in the mix so our listener doesn't have to work and exert themselves hard to hear it. We want them to just be able to relax and receive the music as it is in a way that's palatable and digestible. And so we want the mix to be clean and have everything have their own space in the mix. And so that was proving difficult until I applied this one game-changing technique. So here's the track, and pay attention to how the clutter of the mid-range basses are interacting with the lead. Especially in this last bar here, the mid-range bass sound and the lead, they're really battling for attention. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this technique to gel the mix together a little bit better and have these two sounds be more cohesive. So I need to pick which one I want to be the priority, or the one that's on top of the mix and one that's just a bit below it in the mix. And so I'm going to choose the lead because it's more emotionally moving and is more instrumental to the storytelling of the song than the bass is. The bass kind of just is designed for like a little bit of punch and energy, but the lead is telling the story. So step 1 is I'm going to add an instance of an EQ to my mid-range bass here. So I'm going to choose Ableton's EQ8 for the sake of the demonstration here. And so I've got an instance of EQ8 on the sound that I'm going to reduce a little bit. So that's the one that's less of a priority. In this case, it's the mid-range basses. And so the next thing I need to do is throw a frequency analyzer on the lead because I want to get a sense of what are the dominant frequencies. So I'm using Melda's M Analyzer. So we'll say about 300 hertz to about 2.5K is where the large portion of the energy of the lead is. And so those are the parts that I really want to have room to rock out and really express and sing without being inhibited by another sound in the mix. And so I'm going to go to my instance of EQ8 and I'm going to dial in some of those frequencies here. We'll choose 300. It's kind of like a nice middle ground on the lower end of where the energy is. We'll turn the Q down a little bit. So I've got my upper mid-range EQ notch and I've got my lower mid-range EQ notch. And so the next step, the reason why I selected these, I hope it's clear, is because these are the dominant frequencies of the lead. So we're going to bring them down in the bass a little bit. So here's where things get super juicy. So step 1 was add the EQ. Step 2 was check out the frequencies of the priority sound. And step 3 is create EQ notches where in those priority frequencies on the secondary sound in the mix. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the lead and I'm going to add Ableton's Max for Live device, the envelope follower. So the envelope follower is going on the lead, which is the priority sound. I'm going to turn up the gain a little bit to about 10. We can play with this in a moment. I like to turn up the rise and fall a little bit. We'll talk about that in just a moment here. Okay, so I've got the envelope follower on the priority sound, which is the lead. So we're going back up to the mid-range bass group here. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put this instance of the EQ8 into a rack by hitting Command G. Now it's in an audio rack. And so what we're going to do is we're going to map the gain from our 2 EQ notches onto one macro. So we just click the map button, and then the next step is click the gain. I click the gain button on notch number 1, and then hit the map button on macro 1. And I'm doing the same thing for notch number 2. So I'm going to click the gain, and it's coming over here, and boom, macro 1 is now controlling the gain of these EQ notches here. And so next thing I need to do is I need to work the minimums and maximums over here in my map settings. So the minimum is going to be 0, and the maximum is going to be -5. So we're going to start there. And so now I'm going to detick map to close the map settings. And we'll see here that the macro knob all the way down means the EQ spectrum is flat. And so, but if I turn the macro all the way up, those EQ cuts are both engaged. And so now I'm going to go back to the lead, and I'm going to hit map on the envelope follower. And then I'm going back up to the mid-range bass group here, and I'm going to click the macro knob right away. And so now the envelope follower on the lead is now mapped to the macro knob on the mid-range bass, which is right here. So essentially, in plain English, the envelope follower reads an audio signal. So as I play the lead, you'll see it read an audio signal here. There it is. And if I turn up the gain, you'll see that this audio signal gets more powerful. So I'm going to keep it about 10. And so what I need to do now is I need to monitor how this envelope follower is communicating to the mid-range bass macro knob. Because the idea is the lead, the envelope follower on the lead is going to trigger the EQ cuts. So now what this means is that whenever the lead is live, the mid-range basses are cut temporarily. However, when the mid-range lead is not live in the track, like somewhere over here in the intro, we'll see that there's no activity on the macro knob. The lead signal is what activates the macro knob. See right there, we can see it moving a little bit. Okay, so we can see how it's only being reduced by a very small amount. This is telling me that we need to boost the gain on the envelope follower to make that signal more powerful. So I just cranked it, and now we're going to go see how that's impacted how this macro knob performs. There we go. Okay, so what my ears are telling me is I want a little bit more of a cut on the basses here. I want that lead to really have lots of space. This is an improvement. There's quite a bit less clutter, but I think we can do just a little bit better. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to hit the map button, and it's going to bring up my map settings over here, and I'm going to turn up the max to -7 decibels. And so now what that means is that this macro knob turned all the way up. The mapping is engaged with the envelope follower, so I'm not able to click it. But with the macro turned all the way up, now those EQ cuts will go down to -7 instead of -5. So those cuts will be a little bit more dramatic. So now let's hear how much extra space that lead has thanks to the envelope follower mapped to an EQ cut trick. And so we really hear how much extra space that lead has in this bass fill on the last bar before the drop here. So I'm going to turn this rack off so we can hear it business as usual. And so we can kind of hear the lead get buried in this bass stab here. And right here, the lead and the mid-range basses are really competing for space in the mix. However, so when I engage this technique, now with this bass stab here, the lead won't be battling for space. So that bass is now sitting beautifully under the lead, and that lead has tons of space. Lead has tons of space all the way through. And the beauty of it is that because I've set the envelope follower to be mapped to the EQ this way, when the lead is absent in the track, the bass goes back to its full expression. So the cuts are only temporary and being triggered while the lead is live.